Hello everybody, this is another episode of a series called New European Canon. My name is Grzegorz Jankowicz and I conduct interviews with writers invited by Biuro Literackie, chosen by Biuro Literackie for this project. Within 3 years there will be 21 books, 3 books of poetry, 3 books of prose and 1 book for children each year. Together they will create a combination of new perspectives on the ever-present question, what does it mean to be European? Today, my interviewee, my guest is Claudiu Komartin from Romania. Hello, Claudiu. In response to my question about the relationship between literature and community, you wrote that literature should be like a bumpy sidewalk that we stumble over in moments of thoughtfulness. I really like this metaphor of yours. But can this bumpy sidewalk, literature as bumpy sidewalk, can awake us individually only or collectively as well?
First of all, individually, and then if this works, it may extend to a communitary way of rethinking and reshaping ourselves in this frame. It should be above all an individual thing. That's what poetry is about before everything else. A way of touching your inner self, of exploring your emotions and trying to deal with everything that makes you human. But from that it extends to the other. It goes to the other, and it can build around and make communities.
You also wrote that today, especially in the context of the war in Ukraine, we should ask ourselves whether we are really in solidarity. What does it mean for you to be really in solidarity?
I'm not sure I really did say that, or in these words. In solidarity, yes, there is a certain nuance that probably I'm not able right now to explain. Yes, we should have this in mind and in our souls, having this kind of solidarity that can unify, that can make us whole again. And of course, each of us is trying to do it his or her way, through writing, through all kinds of gestures towards the other, being voluntary. I'm not sure I answered your question.
In this response you wrote, you pointed out that we should ask this question to ourselves because sometimes these acts of solidarity, they are meant to help more the one who does them than the one who needs them.
It's the old Schopenhauerian dilemma. There is a certain selfishness in every such gesture, but it's much more than that. It should be, and when it really is, it is much more than that.
You wrote Cobalt at the age of 30.
I published it at 30.
Right.
I wrote it at 28, 29.
How do you feel today after almost a decade from the time of publication. How do you feel about poems from this book as a reader of them?
Some of them are pretty naive. Some of them are old images, not that old, but they're not so vivid anymore. Images of myself. Now I'm almost 40. It's a different time. It's a different period of my life. It's also for me, and maybe for some of the people who would read the book. It's kind of a documentary of a broken relationship, of a toxic relationship, and of the ruins of that time and that love that slowly faded. And it's also it marks a moment, a time in my life when, in a certain sense, I became more mature in my writing, and I became interested after a couple of trips and acquaintances with another way of understanding the world. I became more interested in history and the way history and poetry can work together, can be made allies, and politics also. So it was a pretty complex moment in my evolution, if we can talk about it, an evolution.
The first line of the book and of the poem called Shadows is as follows: old questions got changed. What do we need today? More good questions or more answers to questions once asked?
This thing with answers is difficult for people like me, for people who are doing this kind of exploration that us poets and why not novelists, essayists, some are doing, because we're not into the answers business. Maybe we can put the right questions or try to raise to ask something with significance, but we're not into giving answers or conclusions. That's for other people. That's for Jordan Peterson and Gabor Mate and all the TED Talk guys. So we're just trying to make something out of what we're sensing, the glimpses of understanding that we have in reporting ourselves to everything that happens with us and around us. So I would say that don't expect for answers from the poets, because in the long run, what a poet can really do is to be a prorogue more than someone who's giving answers to the hot questions of the day.
So the prophecy instead of coaching.
A certain prophecy that's almost incomprehensible, but not coaching, not taking the other by the hand and showing him, that's we're not leaders of conscience or politicians.
Claudiu, you chose an extraordinary figure, literary figure, Max Blecher, as the patron of your publishing house.
Yes.
Why him? Of course, besides the fact that he is a great writer, what brought you, what attached you, attracted you to Max Blecher?
I found that Max Blecher is very underrated, still a very underrated writer in Romania. Even if he's a very rare and a wonderful writer who, until the age of 28, when he died, he wrote 3 wonderful novels and a book of poetry. I felt that Blecher's figure, Blecher's image is an ideal image, is a model, could be a model for all especially for the young writers in every time, every age. So, and the fact that I always, since almost 20 years ago when I first read him, I felt that this young guy who suffered a lot from 18 when he discovered his bone tuberculosis, which was back then incurable until 28. He just suffered and wrote. What more can you expect from someone who's dedicated to this, to writing? And I felt that we had a dialogue. I had a dialogue with this young man who died some 50 years, almost 50 years before I was born. And that's how I started taking his example and his face as
mark for your publishing house.
For my publishing house, and before that for a popular poetry club that's still going on after 13 years and 2 weeks.
We have 3 books by Blecher in Polish, all the books of prose. We don't have his poems. I hope that they will be translated. But in his posthumously published book, the Lit Up Barrow, this journal from Sanatorium,
which was not finished.
Which is not finished, of course. He writes about his perspective onto the world after surgery, when he could travel on a horse-drawn carriage again. And these are his words. I absolutely admire this fragment. In everything there was now an elementary simplicity of objects, as if they were only sketched and put in their place. No history, no memory entered the dust of the walls and the asphalt of the streets. It was a new substance of reality from which the town was now built, and myself in the middle of it, new, fresh, without weight and without organs, as a simple line of my own contour. The same experience is described in his novel Scared Hearts. After his first conversation with a doctor, when he is diagnosed with this bone tuberculosis, the character walks through the streets of a town and perceives the buildings as around him as mere sketches. What is the meaning of this epiphany when you see only the sketch of the world, sketches of the world, contours of the world, not without substance, because he says that there is a new substance, but what kind of substance? How can we interpret this beautiful fragment?
I think that everything became very simple for him in terms of the way you see the contours and in the same time I feel that he's looking into himself. I mean, this regard to buildings and the exterior is in the same time towards himself, toward the interior, because he's also talking about organs, And we should have this in mind. He was sicker and sicker. I mean, the fragment that you read is probably written a few months before he died. And I feel that as that was approaching, the world became more and more illuminated for him in a way. And that's something that makes me happy when I think of him and his last days. That there wasn't darkness. There was a lot of light that came into his being.
Blecher appears in the poem titled "Towards the Sea" from the book Cobalt. There is an epigraph from his text. It goes as follows: "Whoever has once been uprooted from life and had time to ask himself the question about its meaning will remain poisoned forever." The persona in this poem seems to be poisoned by this question asked after getting familiar with Blecher or after experiencing this breakdown, existential breakdown, or
both.
Both,
I would say. I mean, it's not just a dialogue with him. It's not just a reflection as a result of. It's not livresque. Mm-hmm. It's something. But indeed, again, we've met something in the way we both saw this poisoning that was common. This is the black Blecher. This is the more skeptical Blecher than the one in the end that we were talking about. And as for myself, I was through a very, very difficult time of cracking my skull and trying to accept that that relationship that we both invested in a lot was shattering, and that's always something very difficult to manage.
I want to ask you about
poetry sometimes helps.
That's for sure. I want to ask you about rather technical thing now. About the title poem, Cobalt. We have two translations of this poem in Polish. One done by Jakub Konhauser, who also translated the whole book.
And the one in the book.
Yes, and the other one by Bartosz Stradomski, who uses the pseudonym Enormi Stationis. And in Kuba's translation, the word cobalt in the title is a noun, and then in the poem it becomes an adjective. But in Stradomski's translation, it stays a noun in the title and in the poem. How does it look like in the original version?
I would say that in Romanian, or at least the way I wanted to make it, it's rather ambiguous. Mm-hmm. I tried to keep it in a zone of ambiguity between the role of an adjective and the role of a noun. So they may both be correct, mm-hmm. or maybe that's interesting. Bartosz translated the poem years before. Yes. Jakub did for the book, when he translated the whole book. Bartosz translated a portion of them for, I think, a Polish magazine. So, because I don't speak Polish, I cannot I cannot say which one of them is the right one, but I feel that both of them are the right one.
Absolutely. I'm not, I was not trying to check which version is more adequate.
For you, I think it's interesting to see
exactly.
to put them in a mirror.
Exactly. Yeah. My intention was to point out that we have these two translations and that the conversation between them is so inspiring, so interesting for the readers. So I recommend you all to search for the other translation. If you know the book Cobalt, then please check out. It's available on one of the online on one of the websites. Please read it and compare it to Jakob Kornhauser's version. What makes more sense to you, Claudiu? The translation of an old book already transferred to your language from a new, or translation of a book by an author completely unknown in your country? You are a translator yourself. You are also an editor, both at the publishing house, at the magazine. Which of these options makes more sense to you?
As an editor and as a reader, I'm very interested in new translations. For instance, I published a few years ago a new translation, which may be the best ever made, of Charles Baudelaire, Les Fleurs du Mal. Of course, it was translated into Romanian in the last 120 years several times. But I needed a new one with new words and a new fashion of reading Baudelaire and bringing his poetical experience into our world and our time. The same with other Verlaine. I also published Verlaine. But as a translator, I'm not going to retranslate older authors. I was proposed to translate Walt Whitman after almost 70 years, 65 years. And in the first, I thought it's something that I could do, but then I realized I'm not. Especially that it was a translation that I, when I was young, I loved, and I was brought up with that book. So I said to myself, okay, it's not my job to retranslate, I don't know, Voltaire or Shakespeare. Anyway, I don't speak English so well. So I'm interested more into bringing new authors, not only contemporary. I mean, we could talk about someone in the 20s, the last century, of 70 years ago, that wasn't translated. Now I'm working with a friend of mine, Irina Vioralkova, on a translation of Holub. Mm-hmm. I'm not speaking Czech, but she's bilingual, and I use a lot of dictionaries, and we work very well together, because Holub was never translated into Romanian. This should have happened in the 80s, 70s, 80s, when he became huge all over Europe, when Ted Hughes translated him into English. I translated Mario Benedetti, who was a very famous poet some 30 years ago. Now he's not as famous as he was in the end of the 20th century, but he's still a wonderful poet, and I was interested in translating him more than, let's say, retranslating Pablo Neruda.
I understand. Claudiu, thank you for the conversation, and I hope
for having me.
Other books and other poems by you will be translated.
I hope this
into
book
Polish.
will be read and discussed.
Thank you very much.